Have a fully fledged one in the course of the week. But I want to first of all apologize to our colleagues. They were supposed to, in the last briefing, we missed our colleague. He was not around, so we had a lot of concerns from the deaf and the dumb because he was absent. So we are sending an apology to them. It was hurriedly called and he was not nearby. But I want to give a brief update on the counter-terror operations that continue. As you're all aware, we have entered day 7 after the deadly suicide blasts at CPS and Parliamentary Avenue. These attacks managed to claim the lives of 4 innocent Ugandans. And initially 37 were injured, and out of whom 35 have been discharged. Only 2 police officers still remain admitted at Mulago with the injuries that are actually out of danger. So there's a bit of progress there. So as we continue to face these unprecedented threats, we should always remember, first of all, the families of those innocent Ugandans who lost their lives, the families of George Katana, Basibe Ismail, Police Constable Kungu Amos, and Christopher Sande. We must also not forget the family of Emily Nyinaneza, who was the first victim of the bomb attacks at Komamboga. The body of Basibe Ismail has not yet been claimed by the relatives. He is the second victim who died at CPS. So we call upon the relatives who are still out there, please come forward and claim the body of Basibe for burial. Just like the remains of the alleged suicide bombers have also not been claimed. Out of the 3 suspected suicide attackers, 2 were identified by a member of the ADF suicide squad. You remember Mudasiru, alias Kaliowa, alias Moze. He managed to identify his accomplices as Wanjusi Abdul, who detonated the bomb at Parliamentary Avenue, and Mansour Uthman, who detonated the one at CPS Kampala. So the relatives can come, we can pick DNA. Of course, the bodies were shattered, but still they require to be buried by relatives as well. Like we've always indicated, these attacks are from a known enemy, that is the ADF, aimed at promoting fear and panic in the public. Therefore, as Ugandans, we should reject all forms of terrorism because it is geared at undermining the fundamental values of humanity here in Uganda, the freedom that we have, and the liberty that Ugandans actually have. So we want to inform all Ugandans and visitors that we are still in a threat environment. These are attacks, of course, that are still unpredictable and unprecedented in nature, but we are doing everything within our means to prevent such kinds of terror attack. But at the same time, we must face the reality that when you are dealing with a terror threat posed by suicide attackers, the chances of stopping such threats from suicide bomb attackers is very slim. Even in advanced countries, places like Israel, they get to face these attacks almost on a daily basis. The UK, just the other week, there was a bomb attack in Liverpool, and just like the many other countries. So no security measure, however advanced, can ensure 100% protection against suicide attackers. So this calls for the vigilance of all Ugandans. Don't leave this burden to security alone. It calls for our concerted efforts. So in our bid as the joint security agencies to disrupt and dismantle acts of domestic terrorism, we have intensified operations along our borders to prevent illegal crossings. And since these operations began, like His Excellency indicated, a total of 106 suspects have been arrested, and including those who are involved in terrorist financing and persons who are involved in the mobilization and incitement of vulnerable Ugandans into the ranks of the ADF. You're aware that 7 suspected terrorists were put out of action, while 4 suicide attackers got killed during the suicide attacks. We want to reiterate that the arrested persons are not targeted for their beliefs, ideology, religion, ethnicity, and any other attachment, because that would make us, the security agencies, appear biased. The public should know that we are only targeting those individuals and groups that have engaged or have conspired to engage or have facilitated the engagements of acts of violence, including terrorism and other violent crimes against Ugandans. Definitely, despite your belief, ideology, or religion, or title, once you breach the law, once you breach the peace and safety of Ugandans, definitely we shall pursue you and ensure that you are brought to justice. So in all these operations that we've conducted, we've been very discriminate. The operations have been intelligence-led, and we have not randomly arrested persons. So we shall continue with our very discriminate operations and ensure that we only target those persons that are highly connected to the threats that have been meted against Ugandans and the country at large. Now, in our further efforts to deter and disrupt terrorism, we are actively monitoring all spaces in homes, places of worship as well, which are acting as domains for recruitment and as collection centers for children who are introduced to ideological messages and briefs. So far, what our joint intelligence components have gathered indicates how children are being recruited and gathered at collection centers, especially in places like here, Kampala, Wakiso, Luwero. We have Ntoroko, Bundibujo, and Kasese. There are, of course, several materials that have been gathered, instruction materials that have been gathered, and also accounts from children who have been rescued. They have indicated how some of their friends are taken away to unknown destinations. For instance, in the course of last week, we raided a suspected recruitment and radicalization center in Kasengeje, village Wakiso Town Council in Wakiso District, which was being headed by one called Sheikh Ruangabo. We only have one name, he's on the run. However, we arrested 2 of his coordinators, identified as Kaija Ismail and Sewachirianga Muhammad. We found them with 22 other children who were brought from as far as Wakiso, Nansana, Ntinda, Kagoma, Kawempe, and Bugerere in Kayunga. So these children were rescued. They are in a shelter home, and the arrangements to reintegrate and reunite them with their parents, guardians, and relatives We also managed to rescue and recover 3 children who found their way from Bunia in the DRC, 7 from Kasese, 6 from Karugutu, and the earlier team of 50 from Bombo. You remember that team? But notably among them, although we shall not go into details, there is Semakula Shafik, aka Fik Abua. This is a 14-year-old male who was kidnapped from Chiboga. We are not going to give the identity of the parents for safety reasons. He was smuggled into the DRC with 10 other children, trained in weapon handling, detonation, and planting of improvised explosives and other maneuvers. He managed to escape and he sneaked back into the country through Kasese, where a good Samaritan got him a lorry up to Lukaya. At Lukaya, he was found loitering at a village called Sebija. Sebija village is in Chamulibwa, by a chapati seller who listened to his ordeal and handed him over to the police. So our intelligence components in Greater Masaka are also trying to see how they can manage this young vulnerable male juvenile. But we want to caution parents. Really, there is no way you can hand over your child to maybe a good Samaritan, a helper, or a caretaker without getting to follow these children to find out their welfare and whereabouts. For instance, this suspected recruitment center was established since last year, around October. It has been going on for more than 1 year. Children have been transiting through. So we want Sewa Chirianga and the colleague Kaija to tell us, give us a good account of the whereabouts of the other children who have been going through that center. But we want parents really. And for sure, we need to take a very tough stand, because we may find that some of the parents are contributory to such acts of recruitment and radicalization of children. In one way or another, they could be facilitating these acts of terror by sponsoring, by facilitating recruitment and so on. So we are going to put a lot of emphasis, at least by effectively securing the border between DRC and Uganda. We shall have disrupted the supply line of recruits to the ADF, and even disrupted entry back into the Congo. Some of them used the recent conflict in the eastern DRC to sneak into the country, but we managed to get some from the refugee camps, and where they were disguising as refugees. And then our territorial police in Kabalagala also arrested 2 suspects after they were found with a detonation device. The 2 suspects are in custody, and the device that they were found with was one that can operate or explode a given explosive device. According to the preliminary information, the suspected destructive device was recovered by security at Munyonyo Speak Resort upon a thorough search of a Toyota Wish, white in color, under registration number UBF 158C. This car was being driven by Abdul Karim Mayow, a 25-year-old Somali driver and resident of Lunguja, Rubaga Division. He claims he operates a special hire, and that it is one called Muhammad Hassan, a 28-year-old Somali colleague, who invited him or hired him to go and pick his relatives, that is a mother and siblings from Munyonyo. So that's how he drove with this suspected destructive device. We've arrested Abdul Karim Mayo and Muhammad Hassan, and we've also arrested the other close associates of the family, that is 40-year-old Asli Yassin Hussein and 20-year-old Masbal Makzamar Chali, a 20-year-old female adult. So when you get such destructive devices, we have a duty to trace backwards for the main component of the suspected destructive device, because during this period of, during this threat environment of terrorism, any destructive device tells a lot about the person who has been found in possession. But we want to actually thank the security at Munyonyo Speech Resort for their level of vigilance and for the thorough search that they continue to conduct in that area. I think Luke will be talking about the operations they made over the weekend on bars and curfew. But what we've noticed is that the nightlife in Kampala and other districts is slowly creeping back, despite restrictions on bars, entertainment, and discos. So this morning, upon the instructions of the Inspector General of Police, the Director of Operations has summoned all territorial commanders, and because of this, has summoned all territorial commanders to come up with new strategies on how to counter bars and other entertainment places. These places are still restricted because of the degree of recklessness that takes place in with what happens in bars, entertainments, and discotheques. And yet, the country has not yet attained the right numbers of vaccinated persons that could help the economy to fully open. So we are still on a roadmap that was issued by the Ministry of Health, and we are hopeful that probably by January 2022, the economy will fully open and we can go back to the previous lifestyles that we used to enjoy. So we expect that from now onwards, with this warning that has been given to territorial commanders, RPCs, DPCs, we don't expect any more laxities in their operations, because they have a duty to make sure that Ugandans are safe and that we try as much as possible to avoid new transmission of COVID-19 in our country. So this is a warning to revelers, bar staff, proprietors, that this evening onwards, they are likely to face serious consequences for violating the curfew and COVID-19 protocols. We don't know why people are impatient, and yet we have just 1 month to cross over into the January 2022 promise. We have also given them instructions that once they get a bar open, all the gadgets, like fridges, music systems, they should attach all those, because these are things that keep on, if they continue leaving them, the same music systems will be used and so on. So they should attach all these. And even if there is cash which is involved in the safe, they should attach that, they exhibit the money, and so that you cripple the business which is still restricted. So notably, some of the happening places, we got intelligence that Drew and Jack, there's X-Hub in Nigeria, there are bars at Forest Mall that have been continuing to operate with impunity, and we cannot allow for this to actually continue. So the crackdown on bars and entertainment centers is going to be intensified. We've also dispatched a team from the anti-human child sacrifice squad to Mayuge. This follows a case that was registered surrounding the death of a 1.5-year-old girl child, identified as Saira Judith. She was murdered under suspected ritualistic grounds. And you're aware, as a country, we had greatly fought this practice, which was so prominent in the early 2000s, up to around 2006. So we want to ensure that these incidents of child sacrifice don't come back. We've sent this team to ensure that they track the perpetrators behind the horrific vice and have the victim and have the suspects arrested. Now, Sarah Judith, 1.5-year-old girl juvenile, was staying with the grandfather, Bamutaze Issa, aged 50 years, and a resident of Chisiro village, Bumwena parish, Malongo sub-county in Mayuge. She disappeared on the 13th of this month at around 6 p.m. And that's where we have question marks, because at 6 p.m., 1.5-year-old, you expect the child to be within the precincts of the homestead and with somebody actually watching her. So her body was recovered 3 days later on the 17th of this month at around 1 p.m. The private parts had been removed, the eyes had been googled out, and the other missing parts in the mouth. So we are concerned about this incident. We shall be giving you an update, but we are going to start by questioning the grandfather, who should tell us, how do you just leave a 1.5-year-old child to just loiter around and at 6 p.m. in the evening? Another painful incident involved two teenagers who fought. That is in Chenjojo district. These are young girls of 11 and 13. And it so happened that on the 17th of this month at around 5 p.m., one Komhanji Catherine, aged 11 years, and others were from the well, just like girls do. So on her way back, that is at Mabale village, Nyantungo sub-county in Chenjojo district. So as they were coming back from the well, they met another girl called Kobusinje Catherine. They met Kobusinje Mary, aged 13 years. The deceased is Komuhanji Catherine, aged 11. She's the one who was coming back from the well with her colleagues. And they met Kobusinje Mary, 13, who was grazing animals. She was grazing animals to their family. She's the daughter of Rabuhweza Kabutaha. So what Kobusinje Mary did, remember she was 2 years older, she blocked the way for this group of young girls who were returning from the well. And so when she stood on the way, she started assaulting this 11-year-old girl victim with a stick, which she was using for grazing. So she hit her on the head and then several times on the neck. while uttering, "Let me kill you today, let me kill you." So the deceased became unconscious out of the physical beating and assault. And when she was rushed to God's Care Clinic, she passed on at around 9 p.m. From the injuries that she sustained. Now, why we are concerned is these are young girls, 13 and 11. When you start going into these physical fights with an intention of killing, hitting the head, and these are pressure points, it is a concern for us as parents, members of the public, and even security. Because now it shows that some of the parents are not closely monitoring their children. And you see, temperament and anger grows. Once a child throws a bottle, once a child picks a stone and throws it, and you keep quiet, you're building, you're trying to groom those acts of anger and temperament in the children. It is not normal that a child will pick a stick and hit another child on the head. So as parents, we really need to be in control of our children, and where we see that there are symptoms of violence, we really need to come out and tame them. In the operations that we carried out regarding curfew and other lockdown restrictions during the week, we managed to arrest 1,623 pedestrians. We cautioned 1,064. 267 are on police bond, 63 pending court, the files are not yet back, and 229 pedestrians were taken to court. 1,135 motor vehicles were impounded. We issued EPS tickets to 1,056 motorists, cautioned 74 motorists. There are still 5 vehicles parked at different stations. Then 2,621 motorcycles, including border borders, were impounded. 1,899 were issued with EPS. We cautioned 470 riders, and 252 motorcycles are still at police stations.